started. Good evening, and thank you for attending the ASBH Evening with the Humanities. My name is Jane Hartsock. I'm the Director of Clinical and Organizational Ethics with the Academic Health Center at Indiana University Health, and I will be moderating this session this evening. We are streaming this event from the Kurt Vonnegut Museum and Library here in Indianapolis, Indiana. This museum is located in a particularly significant part of Indianapolis across from the Madam Walker Theater, at the intersection of West Street, Indiana Avenue, and Martin Luther King Boulevard, within walking distance of both IUPUI and the Indiana University Academic Health Center, which are the professional homes of those of us involved in this presentation. Tonight, each of us will be presenting from a different location in the museum. I'm in the Slaughterhouse 5 room in front of the Dresden exhibit, which portrays the bombing of Dresden from Vonnegut's novel Slaughterhouse 5. The Vonnegut Museum serves to preserve Vonnegut artifacts and provides researchers with both the Vonnegut collection and a research facility to do their work. The museum also hosts important programming for the Indianapolis community, such as the youth writing program for students in the Indianapolis public high schools, teacher training workshops for professional development, veterans programs, prison programs, and general programs to engage readers and thinkers, including a free community day this Saturday. We wish you could all be here in person to see a bit of our city and to experience this museum in person, but we're glad you could be here virtually and hope that after the program, you'll explore a bit of the museum through the website to learn more about Indianapolis and about Kurt Vonnegut. As for how we'll spend our time this evening, shortly I will play a pre-recorded staged reading of Vonnegut's 1968 play, Fortitude. Following this, our three panelists will provide some initial thoughts on the play, reflecting and informed by their various areas of expertise. These remarks will be followed by a moderated discussion with opportunities for our audience to pose questions, comments, and the notorious questions that are more of a comment than a question. Our panelists this evening are Dr. Elizabeth Nelson, an historian and assistant professor with the Medical Humanities and Health Studies program at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. Dr. Peter Schwartz, director of the Indiana University Center for Bioethics, associate professor of medicine at the IU School of Medicine, and associate professor of philosophy in the IU School of Liberal Arts at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. We call that IUPUI here. Dr. Schwartz also practices adult outpatient medicine in Eskenazi. Dr. Lucia Voschel is the nurse ethicist at the Charles Warren Fairbanks Center for Medical Ethics at Indiana University Health in Indianapolis. She is an active member of the Ethics Consultation Service at IU Health, and she has been a nurse for more than 30 years. Her clinical background is neonatal intensive care. Her program of research is focused on moral distress. A few preliminaries before we begin. In the chat, you will find shortly three links. The first is to our program for this evening, which is housed on Google Drive. To save as much time as possible for our panel discussion, I will not be doing lengthy introductions of our panelists or the actors who performed in the staged reading of Fortitude. If you would like to know more about these individuals who were involved in this production, please do feel free to take a look at the program. The second link is to the website for the museum, which can provide you with additional information about the museum, including information about events taking place next year in celebration of Kurt Vonnegut's 100th birthday, as well as the April 10th unveiling of the museum's historical marker, which will make the Vonnegut Museum and Library the very first literary landmark in the state of Indiana. Please place your questions not in the chat, but in the Q&A box. You're welcome to begin putting those questions there during the presentation. If you're worried you may forget your question. So let me put my links here in the chat for you all now so that you can take a look at those either hopefully after the program. And there we go. And then with that, I'm going to start the play for you guys to watch, and then we'll be back to discuss.
Fortitude by Kurt Vonnegut. The time, the present. The place, upstate New York. A large room filled with pulsing, writhing, panting machines that perform the functions of various organs of the human body. Heart, lungs, liver, and so on. Color-coded pipes and wires swoop upward from the machines to converge and pass through a hole in the ceiling. To one side is a fantastically complicated master control console. Dr. Albert Little, a kindly attractive young general practitioner, is being shown around by the creator and boss of the operation, Dr. Norbert Frankenstein. Frankenstein is 65, a crass medical genius. Seated at the console, wearing headphones and watching meters and flashing lights, is Dr. Tom Swift, Frankenstein's enthusiastic first assistant.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Yep. Those are her kidneys over there. That's her liver, of course. There you got her pancreas.
Amazing. Dr. Frankenstein, after seeing this, I wonder if I've even been practicing medicine, if I've ever been to medical school. That is her heart.
That's a Westinghouse heart. They make a damn good heart if you ever need one. And they make a kidney I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole.
That heart is probably worth more than the whole township where I practice.
That pancreas is worth your whole state. Vermont?
Vermont?
What we paid for the pancreas, yeah, we could have bought Vermont for that. Nobody's ever made a pancreas before, and we had to have one in 10 days or lose the patient. So we told all the big organ manufacturers, okay, you guys have got to crash a program for pancreas. Put every man you got on the job. We don't care what it costs as long as we get a pancreas. By next Tuesday.
And they succeeded.
The patient's still alive, isn't she? Believe me, those are some expensive sweetbreads.
But the patient could afford them.
You don't live like this on Blue Cross and Blue Shield.
And how many operations has she had? In how many years?
Well, I gave her a first major operation 36 years ago, and she's had 78 operations since.
And how old is she?
100.
What guts that woman must have.
You're looking at him.
I mean, what courage, what fortitude.
Well, we knock her out, you know. I mean, we don't operate without anesthetics.
Even so.
Frankenstein taps Swift on the shoulder. Swift frees an ear from the headphones, divides its attention between the visitors and the console.
Dr. Tom Swift, this is Dr. Albert Little. Tom here's my first assistant.
Howdy doody.
Dr. Little has a practice up in Vermont. He happened to be in the neighborhood, asked for a tour.
What do you hear in the headphones?
Anything that's going on in the patient's room. Be my guest.
Nothing.
She's having her hair brushed now. The beautician's up there. She's always quiet when her hair's being brushed.
We should congratulate our young visitor here.
What for?
A good question. What for?
Oh, I know about the great honor that has come your way.
I'm not sure I do.
You are the Dr. Little, aren't you? Who was named the Family Doctor of the Year in the Ladies' Home Journal last month?
Yes, that's right. I don't know how in the hell they decided, and I'm even more flabbergasted that a man of your caliber would know about it.
I read the Ladies' Home Journal from cover to cover every month.
You do?
I only got one patient, Mrs. Lovejoy, and Mrs. Lovejoy reads the Ladies' Home Journal, so I read it too. That's what we talk about. What's in the Ladies' Home Journal? We read all about you last month. Mrs. Lovejoy kept saying, "Oh, what a nice young man he must be, so understanding." Now, here you are in the flesh. Oh, I bet she wrote you a letter.
Yes, she did.
She writes thousands of letters a year, gets thousands of letters back. Some pen pal she is.
Is she generally cheerful most of the time?
Well, if she isn't, then it's our fault down here. If she gets unhappy, that means something down here isn't working right. She was blue about a month ago, and, well, turned out it was a bum transistor in the console. There. She'll be all depressed for a couple of minutes now. Now, pretty quick, she'll be happier than she was before. She'll sing like a bird.
Little conceals his horror imperfectly. Patient's room, which is full of flowers and candy boxes and books. The patient is Sylvia Lovejoy, a billionaire's widow. Sylvia is no longer anything but a head connected to pipes and wires coming up through the floor. But this is not immediately apparent. The first shot of her is a close-up with Gloria, a gorgeous beautician standing behind her. Sylvia is a heartbreakingly good-looking old lady, once a famous beauty. She's crying now.
Gloria,
Ma'am.
wipe these tears away before someone comes in and sees them.
Yes, ma'am. They're there.
I don't know what came over me. Suddenly I was so sad. I couldn't stand it.
Everybody has to cry sometimes.
It's passing now. Can you tell I've been crying?
Gloria is unable to control her own tears anymore. She goes to a window so Sylvia can't see her cry. Camera backs away to reveal the tidy clinical abomination of the head and wires and pipes. The head is on a tripod. There's a black box with winking colored lights hanging under the head, where the chest would normally be. Mechanical arms come out of the box where arms would normally be. There's a table within easy reach of the arms. On it are a pen and paper, a partially solved jigsaw puzzle, and a bulky knitting bag. Sticking out of the bag are needles and a sweater in progress. Hanging over Sylvia's head is a microphone on a boom.
Oh, what a foolish old woman you must think I am. Gloria, are you still there?
Yes.
Is anything the matter?
No.
You're such a good friend, Gloria. I want you to know I feel that with all of my heart.
I like you too.
If you ever have any problems I can help you with, I hope you'll ask me.
I will. I will.
Howard Derby, the hospital mail clerk, dances in with an armload of letters. He's a merry old fool.
Mailman, mailman.
Mailman! God bless the mailman!
How's the patient today?
Very sad a moment ago, but now that I see you, I want to sing like a bird.
53 letters today. There's even one from Leningrad.
There's a blind woman in Leningrad. Poor soul, poor soul.
West Virginia, Honolulu, Brisbane, Australia.
Sylvia selects an envelope at random.
Wheeling, West Virginia. Now, who do I know in Wheeling? Dear Mrs. Lovejoy, you don't know me, but I just read about you in the Reader's Digest, and I'm sitting here with tears streaming down my cheeks. Reader's Digest? My goodness, that article was printed 14 years ago, and she just read it?
Old Reader's Digest go on and on. I've got one at home I'll bet is 10 years old. I still read it every time I need a little inspiration.
I am never going to complain about anything that ever happens to me ever again. I thought I was as unfortunate as a person can get when my husband shot his girlfriend 6 months ago and then blew his own brains out. He left me with 7 children and with 8 payments still to go on a Buick Roadmaster, with 3 flat tires and a busted transmission. After reading about you, though, I sit here and count my blessings. Isn't that a nice letter?
Sure is.
There's a P.S. Get well real soon, you hear. There isn't a letter from Vermont, is there?
Vermont?
Last month, when I had that low spell, I wrote what I'm afraid was a very stupid, self-centered, self-pitying letter to a young doctor I read about in the Ladies' Home Journal. I'm so ashamed. I live in fear and trembling of what he's going to say back to me, if he answers at all.
What could he say? What could he possibly say?
He could tell me about the real suffering going on out there in the world. About people who don't know where their next meal is coming from. About people so poor they've never been to a doctor in their whole lives. And to think of all the help I've had. All the tender, loving care. All the latest wonders science has to offer.
Corridor outside Sylvia's room. There's a sign on the door saying, "Always enter smiling!" exclamation mark. Frankenstein and Little are about to enter.
She's in there,
Every part of her that isn't downstairs.
and everybody obeys this sign, I'm sure.
Part of the therapy. We treat the whole patient here.
Gloria comes from the room, closes the door tightly, then bursts into noisy tears.
Oh, for crying out loud, what is this?
Let her die, Dr. Frankenstein. For the love of God, let her die.
This is her nurse?
She hasn't got enough brains to be a nurse. She's a lousy beautician. $100 a week she makes just to take care of one woman's face and hair. Oh, you blew it, honey bunch. You're through.
What?
Pick up your check and scram.
I'm her closest friend.
Some friend. You just asked me to knock her off.
In the name of mercy, yes, I did.
You're that sure that there's a heaven, eh? You want to send her right up there so she can earn her wings and harp.
I know there's a hell. I've seen it. It's in there. And you're its greatest inventor.
Christ. The things people say sometimes.
It's time somebody who loves her actually spoke up.
Love.
You wouldn't know what that is.
Love. Do I have a wife? No. Do I have a mistress? No. I've loved only 2 women in my life, my mother and that woman in there. I wasn't able to save my mother from death. I just graduated from medical school and my mother was dying of cancer of the everything. Okay, wise guy, I said to myself, you're such a hot-shot doctor from Heidelberg now. Let's see if you can save your mother from death. And everybody told me there wasn't anything I could do for her. And I said, oh, I don't give a damn. I'm going to do something anyway. And they finally decided I was nuts. And so they put me in a crazy house for a little while. And when I got out, she was dead. The way all the wise men said that she had to be. What those wise men didn't know was all the wonderful things that machinery could do, and neither did I, but I was going to find out. So I went to Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and I studied mechanical engineering and chemical engineering and electrical engineering, and for 6 long years. I lived in the attic. I ate 2-day-old bread and the kind of cheese that they wouldn't even put in mouse traps. When I got out of MIT, I said to myself, okay, boy, it's just barely possible now that you're the only guy on earth with a proper education to practice 20th century medicine. I went to work for the Curley Clinic in Boston. They brought in this woman who was beautiful on the outside and a total mess on the inside. She was the image of my mother. She was the widow of a man who had left her $500 million. She didn't have any relatives. The wise men said again, this lady's got to die. And I said to them, shut up and listen. And I'm going to tell you what we're going to do.
That's quite a story.
It's a story about love. That love story started years and years before you were born, you great lover, you. And it's still going on.
Last month, she asked me to bring her a pistol so she could shoot herself.
You think I don't know that? Last month, she wrote him a letter, and she said, oh, Go bring me some cyanide, doctor, if you're a doctor with any heart at all.
You knew that? You read her mail?
So I know what she's really feeling. She might try to fool us sometime. Just pretend to be happy. I told you about that bum transistor last month. We maybe wouldn't have known anything was wrong if we hadn't have read her mail and listened to what she was saying to lame brains like this one here. Look, you go in there all by yourself, stay as long as you want, ask her anything. Then you come back out and tell me the truth. Is that a happy woman in there, or is that a woman in hell? Go on in. Go on in. I got some more things to say to this young lady, Miss Mercy Killing of the Year. I'd like to show her a body that's been in a casket for a couple of years sometime. Let her see how pretty death is. This thing she wants for her friend.
Little gropes for something to say. Finally mimes his wish to be fair to everyone. He enters the patient's room. Patient's room. Sylvia's alone, faced away from the door.
Who's that?
A friend. Somebody you wrote a letter to.
That could be anyone. Can I see you, please? Dr. Little, family doctor from Vermont.
Mrs. Lovejoy. How are you today?
Did you bring me cyanide?
No.
I wouldn't take it today. It's such a lovely day. I wouldn't want to miss it. Or tomorrow either. Did you come on a snow-white horse?
In a blue Oldsmobile.
What about your patients who love and need you so?
Another doctor is covering for me. I'm taking a week off.
Not on my account.
No.
Because I'm fine. You can see what wonderful hands I'm in.
Yes.
The one thing I don't need is another doctor.
Right.
I do wish I had somebody to talk to about death, though. You've seen a lot of it, I suppose.
Some.
And it was a blessing for some of them when they died.
I've heard that said.
But you don't say so yourself.
It's not a professional thing for a doctor to say, Mrs. Lovejoy.
Why have other people said that certain deaths have been a blessing?
Because of the pain the patient was in, because he couldn't be cured at any price within his means, or because the patient was a vegetable and had lost his mind and couldn't get it back.
At any price.
As far as I know, it is not now possible to beg, borrow, or steal an artificial mind from someone who's lost one. If I asked Dr. Frankenstein about it, he might tell you it's the coming thing.
It is the coming thing.
He's told you so.
I asked him yesterday, what would happen if my brain started to go? He was serene. He said, I wasn't to worry my pretty little head about that. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, he told me. Oh, God, the bridges I've crossed.
Back to the room full of organs as before. Swift is at the console. Frankenstein and Little enter.
You've made the grand tour, and now here you are back at the beginning.
And I still have to say what I said at the beginning. My God. Oh my God.
It's gonna be a little tough going back to the aspirin and laxative trade after this, huh?
Yes. What's the cheapest thing here?
It's the stupidest thing. It's the goddamn pump.
What does a heart go for these days?
$60,000. There are cheaper ones than more expensive ones. The cheap ones are junk. The expensive ones are jewelry.
And how many are sold a year now?
600, give or take a few.
Give one, that's life. Take one, that's death.
If the trouble is the heart. It's lucky if you have a trouble that cheap. Hey, Tom, put her to sleep so he can see how the day ends around here.
It's 20 minutes ahead of time.
What's the difference? We put her to sleep for 20 minutes extra. She still wakes up tomorrow feeling like $1,000,000. Unless we got another bum transistor.
Why don't you have a television camera aimed at her so you can watch her on a screen?
She didn't want one.
She gets what she wants.
She got that. What the hell do we have to watch her face for? We can look at the meters down here and find out more about her than she can know about herself. Put her to sleep, Tom.
It's just like slowing down a car or banking a furnace.
Tom, too, has degrees in both engineering and medicine.
Are you tired at the end of the day, Tom?
Yeah, but it's a good kind of tiredness, as though I'd flown a big jet from New York to Honolulu or something like that. And now we will bring in Mrs. Lovejoy for a happy landing. There.
Beautiful.
She's asleep.
Like a baby.
All I have to do now is wait for the night man to come on.
Has anybody ever brought her a suicide weapon?
No. We wouldn't worry about that if they did. The arms are designed so she can't possibly point a gun at herself or get poison to her lips, no matter how she tries. Oh, that was Tom's stroke of genius.
Congratulations.
Alarm bell rings, light flashes.
Who could that be? What? Somebody just went into her room. Well, we better check. Lock the door up there, Tom, so whoever it is, we got him. You come with me.
Patient's room, Sylvia is asleep, snoring gently. Gloria has just sneaked in. She looks around furtively, takes a revolver from her purse, makes sure it's loaded, then hides it in Sylvia's knitting bag. She's barely finished when Frankenstein and Little enter breathlessly, Frankenstein opening the door with a key.
What's this?
I left my watch up here. I've got it now.
I thought I told you never to come into this building again.
I won't.
You keep her right there. I'm gonna check things over. Maybe there's been a little huggery-buggery. How would you like to be put in court for attempted murder, huh? Tom, can you hear me?
I hear you.
Wake her up again. I gotta give her a check.
Cock-a-doodle-doo.
Machinery can be heard speeding up below. Sylvia opens her eyes, sweetly dazed.
Good morning, Norbert.
How do you feel?
The way I always feel when I wake up. Fine. Vaguely at sea. Gloria, good morning.
Good morning.
Dr. Little, you're staying another day.
It isn't morning. We'll put you back to sleep in a minute.
I'm sick again.
I don't think so.
I'm going to have another operation.
Calm down, calm down.
How can I be calm when I think about another operation?
Tom, give her some tranquilizers.
Coming up.
What else do I have to lose? My ears, my hair?
You'll be calm in a minute.
My eyes? My eyes, Norbert, are they going next?
Oh boy, baby dog. Will you look at what you've done? Where the hell are those tranquilizers?
Should be taking effect just about now.
Oh, well, it doesn't matter. It is my eyes, isn't it?
It isn't your anything.
Easy come, easy go.
You're as healthy as a horse.
I'm sure somebody manufactures excellent eyes.
RCA makes a damn good eye, but we aren't going to need to buy one for a while yet. Everything's all right up here. Lucky for you.
I love it when friends of mine are lucky.
Put her to sleep again?
Not yet. I want to check a couple of things down here.
Roger and out.
Little, Gloria, and Frankenstein enter the machinery room minutes later. Swift is at the console.
Night man's late.
Oh, he's got troubles at home. You want a good piece of advice? Don't ever get married.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
You've never seen this before?
No.
She was the great hair specialist. We took care of everything else. Everything but the hair. What's this? Ah, that's more like it.
Science.
What did you think it was like down here?
I was afraid to think. Now I can see why.
You got any scientific background at all? Any way of appreciating even slightly what you're seeing down here?
I flunked earth science twice in high school.
What do they teach in beauty college?
Dumb things for dumb people. How to paint a face, how to curl and uncurl hair, how to dye hair, fingernails, toenails in the summertime.
I suppose you're gonna crack off about this place after you get out of here. Gonna tell people all the crazy stuff that goes on.
Maybe.
Just remember this. You haven't got the brains or the education to talk about any aspect of this operation, right?
Maybe.
Well, what will you say to the outside world?
Nothing very complicated. Just
Yes.
that you have the head of a dead woman connected to a lot of machinery, and you play with it all day long, and you aren't married or anything, and that's all you do.
How can you call her dead? She reads the Ladies' Home Journal. She talks, she knits, she writes letters to pen pals all over the world.
She's like some horrible fortune-telling machine in a penny arcade.
I thought you loved her.
Every so often, I see a tiny little spark of what she used to be. I love that spark. Most people say they love her for her courage. What's that courage worth when it comes from down here? You could turn a few faucets and switches down here and she'd be volunteering to fly a rocket ship to the moon. But no matter what you do down here, that little spark goes on thinking, for the love of God, somebody get me out of here.
Dr. Swift, is that microphone open?
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Leave it open. She's heard every word you said. How does that make you feel?
She can hear me right now?
Run off at the mouth some more. You're saving me a lot of trouble. Now I won't have to explain to her what sort of friend you really were and why I gave you the old heave-ho.
Mrs. Lovejoy,
She says, "What is it, dear?"
there's a loaded revolver in your knitting bag, Mrs. Lovejoy, in case you don't want to live anymore.
You total imbecile. Where did you get a pistol?
From a mail order house in Chicago. They hadn't had in true romances.
They sell guns to crazy broads.
I could have had a bazooka if I wanted one. $14.98.
I'm going to get that pistol now, and it is going to be Exhibit A at your trial.
Shouldn't you put the patient to sleep?
There's no way she can hurt herself.
What does he mean?
Her arms are fixed so that she can't point a gun at herself.
They even thought of that.
Sylvia's room. Frankenstein is entering. Sylvia's holding the pistol thoughtfully.
Nice playthings you have.
You mustn't get mad at Gloria, Norbert. I asked her for this. I begged her for this.
Last month?
Yes?
But everything's better now.
Everything but the spark.
Spark?
The spark that Gloria says she loves. The tiny spark. Of what I used to be. As happy as I am right now, that spark is begging me to take this gun and put it out.
And what's your reply?
I am going to do it, Norbert. This is goodbye.
She tries every which way to aim the gun at herself, fails and fails, while Frankenstein stands calmly by.
That's no accident, is it?
We very much don't want you to hurt yourself. We love you too.
And how much longer must I live like this? I've never dared to ask.
I would have to pull a figure out of a hat.
Maybe you'd better not. Did you? Pull one out of a hat?
At least 500 years.
So, I will still be alive long after you're gone.
Now is the time, my dear Sylvia, to tell you something I've wanted to tell you for years. Every organ downstairs has the capacity to take care of 2 human beings instead of 1. And the plumbing and the wiring have all been designed so that a second human being can be hooked up in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail. Do you understand what I'm telling you, Sylvia? Sylvia, I'm going to be that second human being. Talk about marriage. Talk about great love stories from the past. Your kidney will be my kidney. Your liver will be my liver. Your heart will be my heart. Your ups will be my ups, and your downs will be my downs. We're going to live in such perfect harmony, Sylvia, that the gods will themselves will tear out their hearts in envy.
This is what you want.
More than anything in this world.
Well then, here it is, Norbert.
She empties the revolver into him. Same room, almost a half hour later. A second tripod has been set up with Frankenstein's head on top. Frankenstein is asleep, and so is Sylvia. Swift, with Little standing by, is feverishly making a final connection to the machinery below. There are pipe wrenches and a blowtorch and other plumbers' and electricians' tools lying around.
That's gotta be it. That's gotta be it.
28 minutes since the last shot was fired.
Thank God you were around.
What we really needed was a plumber.
Charlie, we're all set up here. You all set down there?
All set.
Give them plenty of martinis.
Gloria appears numbly in the doorway.
They've got him. They'll be higher than kites.
Better give them a touch of LSD, too.
Coming up.
Hold it. I forgot the phonograph. Dr. Frankenstein said that if this ever happens, he wanted a certain record playing when he came to. He said it was in with the other records in a plain white jacket. See if you can find it.
Is this it?
Put it on.
Which side?
I don't know.
There's tape over one side.
The side without tape. Stand by to wake up the patients.
Standing by.
Record begins to play. It's Jeanette MacDonald and a Nelson Eddy duet. All sweet mystery of life.
Wake them up.
Frankenstein and Sylvia wake up, filled with formless pleasure. They dreamily appreciate the music, eventually catch sight of each other, perceive each other as old and dear beloved friends.
Hi there.
Hello.
How do you feel?
Fine. Just fine.
All right, we welcome you back. And we're going to turn now at this point to have each of our panelists provide their own initial thoughts and reflections on this play. I'm going to have Dr. Elizabeth Nelson go first, and I will turn it over to you. Thanks.
Okay, let me know if there's any problems hearing me. So Fortitude first appeared in 1968, and the teleplay might be read as an exploration of some of the life-sustaining technologies that date to the mid-20th century, from mechanical ventilators that supported polio victims to the dialysis and bypass machines that can take over for kidneys and hearts. Such technologies made possible medical feats like organ transplantation, but they've also brought extended mechanized deaths in ICUs. Embedded in Fortitude is a critique of privileging technology over humanity, notably in its depiction of Sylvia's heartbreaking situation in which she wishes to die, but is forced to remain alive by a narcissistic physician. But there's also possibly a fantasy of extending life that is threaded through the play, a fantasy that may have stemmed from Kurt Vonnegut's personal biography. In Mary Shelley's 1818 novel, Victor Frankenstein becomes obsessed with finding the secret to animating dead matter after the death of his mother. It's also the death of his mother that sets Fortitude's Norbert Frankenstein off on his horrific project. We might also consider that Kurt Vonnegut lost his mother to a tragic overdose when he was in his early 20s, an event that affected him deeply. Perhaps he dreamed of saving her, and we might look at the technological marvels of Fortitude, those that keep Sylvia perpetually alive in that light. Although Frankenstein is the text's explicit inspiration, it also made me think of another 19th century novel called The Future Eve by the French author Villiers de l'Isle Adam, which appeared in 1886. It was this book that first introduced the term android. In it, a fictionalized Thomas Edison creates a perfect robotic woman to be a romantic companion for his friend, a man named Lord Ewald. The novel features a lingering description of the dissection of the robot, as scientist and would-be lover regard with awe the complexity of the android's mechanical parts. There is a displaced eroticism here, as the artificial woman is both reverenced and desexualized, perhaps made cleaner and more ideal and more easily controlled in the eyes of her male creators as a result. At the same time, it is difficult not to think of Sigmund Freud's Oedipal complex when Fortitude's Dr. Frankenstein declares, "I have only loved two women in my life, my mother and that woman in there." Of course, coming from Kurt Vonnegut, there are strong elements of the comedic and the absurd in this teleplay. So perhaps a better kind of textual comparison might be the 1983 Steve Martin film, The Man with Two Brains, in which a man falls in love with a disembodied brain and attempts to put it into the body of a sex worker. Like Fortitude, the film explores the question of the location of consciousness and identity. Are we, you or I, located in our heads, our brains, at least more so than in the rest of our bodies? How much of one's body can a person lose and still be themselves? This is a question I think many of us as we age ask ourselves as things start to fail. Sylvia wonders this herself. She asks, what would happen if her brain started to go? Vonnegut was, of course, writing at a time when there was a great deal of experimentation with psychedelics and other mind-altering substances for scientific, spiritual, and recreational purposes. The first antipsychotic medications were revolutionizing the field of psychiatry and prompting some to ask whether chemical intervention would alter this or could alter the self to the point of eradicating the authentic core of the personality. The ending of Fortitude, in which Norbert and Sylvia find themselves sharing a body, blissfully flooded with drugs and alcohol, might seem to indicate that that inner spark that Sylvia was talking about at the end can indeed be overridden, given the right tweaks of the body's chemical machinery. On the other hand, perhaps this is an image of Freud's oceanic feeling, the ecstatic, almost mystical feeling of oneness with the universe, felt by infants as they are breastfed by their mothers, but also shared by those who are experiencing mystical union with God. Perhaps, in fact, Norbert Frankenstein has, in a sense, returned to the womb by inhabiting the body of his beloved /mother. So in short, this is a complex text, one that takes up themes of personhood, biochemistry, biotechnology, and even love. It was certainly a product of its time, the 1960s, but it resonates with its 19th century literary precursors and the bioethical conversations of today. And with that, I will pass the torch to the next presenter.
Dr. Schwartz, that is you. Thank you very much, Elizabeth.
Hi, everybody. And, I'll reiterate the welcome to everybody to Indianapolis, at least virtually. And I want to say, I actually have not seen that production before. I think others did. And I'm almost going to throw away what I wrote because it's deepened, I think, and changed my view of the play. I hope it's had that kind of influence on you. I'm in the Youth Writing Center of the Kurt Vonnegut Museum here with a painting behind me by Edie Vonnegut. So I'm not sure I positioned myself right, but I'll be quick. I didn't know this play before, and I'm thrilled to know it now. And actually, Dr. Nelson's comments actually further, it's exactly, really exactly right. And I'm glad we'll have a chance to talk about it. I read the play, and I wanted to figure out what we can learn from it in bioethics. And I'm going to talk about some devil's advocacy here. And I guess seeing Frankenstein played so brilliantly in the production there, I really do feel like I'm advocating for the devil. But what exactly is he doing wrong? Or let's put it this way, what aspect of medicine, what aspect of this medical care is the part that disgusts us? Because like bioethicists everywhere, I've taken the bioethicist creed, the bioethicist oath to help medicine respect its limits. And that's been a great fight and a great quest of bioethics since its inception in the modern age. So we believe and have convinced many that medicine must respect limits and stop pursuing cure or life extension after a certain point. And this is kind of like what Dr. Little says in the play, right? It's when suffering is great, when expense is unacceptable, when the patient's consciousness or identity is lost irreparably, or if the end of life is inevitably imminent. And of course, those features actually are not present in this case, I'm going to argue. What's wrong in this case seems to be something else and something more profound. And again, that's part of the brilliance of the play, I think. There's no reason her life has to end soon. Her demise is not imminent because of the technological advances. Expense is not an issue because of her wealth. It's not exactly clear if she's lost herself. We can talk about that. I hope to stimulate discussion with these comments. Maybe everybody will yell at me, which is fine. I'll just turn off my camera. You won't even know I'm here. But you could argue over her conscience. She has her wits. She has her memories. She expresses her personality to some degree. There's of course suffering, and she's horribly limited in the room. But of course, simply being constrained in that way doesn't mean that her life has no meaning. Her life could have great meaning in this disabled state. Now, we may condemn Frankenstein because she wants to die and he's blocking her. But of course, that desire does not stay in one place. And again, Dr. Nelson's comments are brilliant. The use of chemicals to change mood at this time period, of course, was very much on people's minds, as it is for us today, as we understand the chemical basis for emotions. And so as we think about her desire to die, and then the occasional desire to live and the happiness we see, do we know which one is authentic? Again, the thing that changed for me watching that is I was disgusted I was even going to say this, that I thought, like, of course it's authentic, she wants to die. But I don't know. I can talk myself out of that too. She is living. Vonnegut is a brilliant rhetorician as well as a storyteller here to convince us that it must be wrong for her to live. But again, I don't know. And of course, we bioethicists and in medicine and bioethics, we think a lot about the desire to stop treatment or to pursue death actively. Usually when there's a reason, such as, again, those things we mentioned, great suffering, imminent demise. And those features, again, don't apply to Sylvia. So I would challenge us in our discussion to think of what is wrong with her living on. There's deep things wrong with Frankenstein, as there always must be if your name is Frankenstein. The relationship with his patient, of course, is ugly. Just the love of a patient destroys the medical standing. There's There's also his speech, of course, expresses great psychological scars and clear hubris. But of course, it's driving him towards an end that we have to think about whether that is the end that must be given up. This is the central questions of bioethics. This is why it's a perfect play and a brilliant production. I'm going to shout out to Angie Larimer, who helped put it together, and Emily Beckman, who's not here with us, but they were key to this production as well as Jane, Professor Hartsock. So I'll stop there. I think we'll have a chance to talk about these questions in our discussion. I hope I've kicked off some of that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Dr. Voschel will go next. And Emily actually is here. We put her in the audience so that she could tell us if there are any technical difficulties. She's here.
I know she's here. She wasn't up here.
So I want to also extend my welcome and good evening to those of you who have taken time out of your busy day to join us. I'm coming to you from the writing room at the Vonnegut Museum. What you see on the wall behind me are rejection letters for Mr. Vonnegut for his short stories. And so this is a room that's been recreated to give people a sense of the space that Mr. Vonnegut used when he was writing. So my reflections on the play are a bit different. One thing that really stands out to me is the complete unwillingness of Dr. Frankenstein to allow any consideration or discussion of any path but the one that he has chosen for Sylvia Lovejoy, life at all costs. So when Gloria expresses her intense emotion about the situation of Mrs. Lovejoy, Dr. Frankenstein dismisses her quite literally. He bullies and he belittles her. He sees emotions as a problem, something to control, and a sign of weakness. The sign on the door, this always enter smiling, and his complete control of Sylvia's emotion really underscores, for me, the complete artificial nature of the world that he has created for Sylvia. One might ask, is Sylvia truly able to appreciate the situation, to interact meaningfully with those around her? And I think Dr. Schwartz sort of tipped us to that, like, what's authentic? Who is the authentic self here? Gloria identifies herself as Sylvia's friend, and the interaction between Sylvia and Gloria underscores the relationship. During the interaction, Gloria, who's mindful of the sign on the door, tries to hide her sadness when Sylvia has a controlled episode, first of intense depression, and then a return to a happier state. So Gloria finally musters the courage to tell Dr. Frankenstein what she thinks of him. When Gloria discloses that Sylvia asked her to bring in a pistol, Frankenstein reveals that he's been monitoring all their interactions. Essentially, he's been spying. His arrogance is shocking. His willingness to reveal this fact to Gloria shows how little he thinks of her and his complete failure to acknowledge Gloria's value in Sylvia's world. He treats Gloria as an insignificant annoyance, something that can be replaced. After all, the only thing she does is Sylvia's makeup and hair. One has to wonder if Dr. Frankenstein's disclosure and his demeanor are what emboldens Gloria to bring in the pistol. So Dr. Frankenstein really fails to see the value that Gloria brings to Sylvia's world, the caring presence and the power of friendship, something intangible that can't be created, supported, or controlled with machines or drugs. Although I do appreciate Elizabeth's allusion to what was happening in the context in the world at the time that Mr. Vonnegut was writing this play, the experimentation with drugs, and really, can we have an impact on this? So the power of strong emotion, this strong emotional bond between Sylvia and Gloria is emblematic for me of the emotional work of nursing care. Much of what nurses do is invisible to the casual observer, and yet Gloria, like many nurses, plays a pivotal role in Sylvia's life, and in the end, what happens to Dr. Frankenstein. The complete unwillingness of Dr. Frankenstein to even consider someone else's perspective create an atmosphere that is untenable for Gloria. Even Dr. Little seems to be taken aback. In the end, however, Dr. Little applies his considerable medical knowledge and his skill to save Dr. Frankenstein. It's not clear from the short story how Dr. Little feels about what has happened. It's only clear that he was successful in perpetuating the existence of Dr. Frankenstein. One has to wonder if Dr. Frankenstein left clear instructions for his assistant, Dr. Swift, a sort of advanced directive for what to do next. And if so, how Dr. Swift will interpret those instructions. After all, what if something else goes wrong?
Okay, thank you, each of you, for your thoughts, for your initial responses, which I think did an excellent job, obviously, of getting the conversation started, because we already have a number of questions in the chat from people who are thinking in paragraphs, which is my favorite kind of thinking. So I want to start by asking, I'm going to ask each of you just a question that kind of focuses in on your own individual areas of expertise, and then I will turn to the chat to pull in additional questions and kind of move back and forth, because I have some of my own questions after listening to your presentations. So I wanted to begin with Peter and ask you, so I'll just phrase it in this way, that the play is science fiction, though Vonnegut says at the beginning that it occurs in the present day. Science fiction has a long tradition in bioethics. Many discussions of bioethics involve science fiction scenarios, such as clone armies or babies grown in a laboratory. Is science fiction a good way to consider the key questions of bioethics? Are there downsides to this approach?
Thank you, Jane. Yeah, no, that's a good question. I'll be very quick, because I do want to get to the audience, have a discussion, not just with them, with us, but them with each other. I hope we can pull that off, of course, in this crazy virtual world where you're not here in Indianapolis with us, which makes me sad, but we'll try to pull that off. That question, I did think about that a lot in this play too. I think it's very strange that he says the present day, given of course it couldn't be then. And science fiction is a fascinating tool. It allows us to tease apart themes. It allows us to think ahead, because of course, once technology exists, it's hard to stop. And so we bioethicists will say we must think ahead, and that involves basically science fiction. However, when we think ahead, we don't think well, because what arrives once the technology does arrive, it's different. So for example, we talked a lot about genetic engineering, and then we started that conversation again when CRISPR happened. You might say we didn't start it again, but we had to almost restart it or reboot it when the actual prospect arrived, after we've been talking as a science fiction prospect, as a science fiction issue for a long time. So I think the use of science fiction here is fascinating, both as a tool and then as a limited tool.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that. All right, so I want to ask Elizabeth the next question, and this actually draws on a different area of expertise than you mentioned in your introduction. But I know from you as my colleague that you have a particular interest in the history of incarcerated individuals, and particularly women. And I'm wondering in what ways, or are there any ways that you feel Sylvia's experience reflects or approximates the experience of people who reside in institutionalized settings? And this is particularly interesting to me, in this setting, as Vonnegut himself had been a prisoner of war, so he experienced some of that himself in a prisoner of war camp.
Yes, so I'm going to formulate an answer to that but I also wanted to kind of jump off of some of the comments, and also Professor Schwartz's comments as well, which is to say, so someone in the chat, I think it was Carol Gerson, mentioned, how we kind of get used to certain technologies that seem icky or scary at first. And I think that, to jump off of the science fiction conversation, I think science fiction can kind of do a kind of forecasting for us, and perhaps remind us also in retrospect of what the things that we thought were icky or scary in the past, but now we've kind of gotten used to. It also, strikes me as it's striking to me that we are all sitting here as Sylvia's disembodied heads, and this kind of mode of communication and way of being together might have been horrifying to us, just a few years ago, or unimaginable perhaps decades ago. And so, the way that we can kind of assimilate ourselves into technologies, and the extent to which they dehumanize us is, I think, an interesting question. As far as incarceration, I do think that there's a parallel there in her, in the way that her mobility is limited, in the way that her fate is out of her own hands, certainly. The way that things, are sort of decided for her. I think there's a definite parallel there. I do think the way that she kind of gets into the situation is different. And there's, I would say an important distinction to make would be, her kind of distinctiveness as a wealthy woman who has the means to do this project, to embark on this project, even if she finds herself trapped within it, is very different than the kind of, it's good that, the kind of privilege that she's coming from is very different from the kind of criminalization and racialization and all of those kinds of structures that lead people in general, or women in particular, to become incarcerated. So I think that's an important distinction to make. But in terms of a kind of existential situation that she finds herself in, it certainly, is reminiscent of a state of captivity. So I'll end there for now.
All right, thank you. I have a question as well for Lucia. And my question for Lucia has to do with another area of expertise that I know you are particularly interested in, as I know from my work with you as my colleague. But you mentioned that you think Gloria's relationship is emblematic of what nurses often bring to patient care. And moral distress is often mentioned in the nursing literature as a consequence of that relationship. What role do you think moral distress may have played in Gloria's actions?
Wow. So I think if you listen to what Gloria said, she's the first one to voice an opposing view to Dr. Frankenstein. She raises this voice. So she believes she knows what's right for Sylvia. And she, in many ways, feels powerless to do anything about it, at least until she decides she is actually going to bring the gun in. And many would argue that bringing in an implement of suicide, I think is the phrase that Dr. Little is, bringing that in is not within the scope of practice, and it's not within the standard of care. And it's not something that you would necessarily recommend. And yet I know from both my research, for my clinical work, when people have levels of moral distress that go unaddressed, sometimes they can act in ways that are inconsistent with their core values, and they do things out of almost desperation. So a failure to be in an environment where you can at least discuss just the possibility of what death might mean, and to feel completely constrained in that ability, I'm sure contributed to her frustration and her ultimate decision to bring in a weapon of suicide, of course, not realizing that Dr. Frankenstein had thought of everything. So I think both in this play and when you think about what happens in clinical practice, when members of the team are completely frustrated by what they see as a life of suffering, and they feel powerless to do something about it. I think sometimes we may be tempted to cross a line and do something that is not in anybody's best interest, but it feels like it's really the only thing left to do, because nobody will even discuss the possibility that there is a different path. So I'm not sure that answers the question, but I'm quite certain that moral distress had a big role in Gloria's life, and I know it has a big role to play in the lives of clinicians that care for patients like this.
I'm going to turn over to some of the questions that are in the chat. And the first one that was placed in the chat, I don't know who to direct this to, so I'm just going to open it up to whoever sort of feels like they would like to speak on this. But the comment is, look what great lengths people will go to who struggle with complicated grief to avoid feeling their loss. And that's a question that has a comment that has a sort of meta value in relation to Vonnegut and the loss of his mother, but then it has a sort of mirrored value in the play itself, as Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein narrates almost a mini biography of Vonnegut's own life. So I'm wondering if anybody has any comments or additional thoughts on that as reflected in the play, or as you've seen it reflected in your own practice. I'll turn that over to either any of you.
Peter.
So, Lucia,
Peter raised his hand.
So I just want to say I love that question, because what I love is how this play pathologizes or threatens to pathologize a central motivation of medicine, right? Of fighting death. That Frankenstein is a walking wounded. He is expressing a pathological desire to make up for a loss, and of course, there is a good side to fighting death. There's a good side to being inspired and committing your life to fighting illness and saving people when possible and appropriate. So I actually love that all of us doctors and all of us people and all of us other health providers are motivated by fighting death to some degree, hopefully a reasonable degree. And this play challenges us to find the what Aristotle would call the right level, and it's a hard level to find. So I love that about this play.
Elizabeth, do you want to take a stab at it, or should we move to the next one?
I'll just say that, and this relates to, I think, Kenneth Wright's comment about Vonnegut's materialism, which I'm certainly not an expert on Vonnegut or his philosophical worldview, but I do think that maybe points as well to the limits of the universe of the play. If it is kind of, a materialistic universe, then I think that does perhaps, I don't know, support some of what Professor Schwartz is saying in that, why not continue life if there's nothing else beyond? But also, I think I think that's a limitation perhaps of the worldview of the play, which is to say, in my view, this is my personal view, that death does come for us all, and I do, as much as it is honorable and desirable to want to prolong life if we can and when appropriate, as you said, making space for and peace with and understanding death in a more complex way than materialism can account for, I think is key.
Yeah, I see a number of comments in the chat that are related to, are Sylvia's choices, is it clear and convincing evidence? Does she have authentic autonomy? And I guess I want to give a shout out to Dr. Frankenstein, who, as Dr. Schwartz pointed out, there's nothing wrong with trying to save people, with providing medical technology. What's unclear from the play, and it actually didn't dawn on me until I started reading comments from the audience, is we don't actually know if Sylvia had a choice the first time Dr. Frankenstein intervened. We have no idea of knowing. In the play, the dialogue talks about beautiful on the outside, a mess on the inside. We don't know what the first intervention was. We know she's had multiple surgeries. So it's unclear, and I'm now really curious to think about at what point in that relationship did it become clearly about what Dr. Frankenstein wanted, and it was never clear about what Sylvia wanted. Like in the beginning, did she think it was a good idea? Was she on board with it? Did she exercise her autonomy? Did she say, yeah, I really want this? And at some point there was a line that was crossed. And just like in modern medicine and these complex cases that many of us face, you don't realize you're down that rabbit hole until somebody on the outside says, hey, it's deep and it's dark down there. Like, you're not in a good place. And so I love the comments in the chat, because first of all, I also am so sad we're not here in person, because I miss the animated dialogue. But So thanks to those of you who are putting questions in the Q&A. It does make you think really deeply about at what point, if ever, did Sylvia know what she was getting into? And when did that line get crossed?
Well, I think, so I want to kind of bring together a few points that are sort of circulating in the soup here. And the clear and convincing evidence comment that you mentioned resonates obviously with me because of my background in law, but that the articulation of that evidentiary standard gets support from the Cruzan decision, which is the first time the Supreme Court weighs in on whether a person has a constitutional right to refuse treatment and even life-saving treatment. And one of the things that is interesting about that, or has always been interesting about that case to me, is the dissent by Justice Stevens, where he disagrees with the idea that that's even an appropriate evidentiary standard. He finds it too high. It's too high a burden to meet to try to establish that somebody would have, that there's clear and convincing evidence that somebody would have wanted to decline treatment. And his reasoning for that is that a person has a kind of constitutional right to their legacy, to how they are remembered, and to having some control and autonomy over that. So I'm wondering if, when we think about what Sylvia would have wanted, how you all feel about sort of, I hear Peter making the sort of devil's advocate argument of like, Dr. Frankenstein is doing the work, keeping people alive. Are there things that are worse than death? And how high a burden should we place on the patient to clearly and convincingly articulate that they would like to die?
I'm going to do the short answer. Yes, I think there are things worse than death. I think that for me is an obvious answer. And I think not just the burden on the patient, but the burden of the people who are providing care to her. So I'm going to do the short answer and then back out and let my colleagues speak to the other pieces of your question.
Well, it seemed pretty clear to me, at least in the space of the play itself. I'm not sure how much more clear you could be. You're trying to pick up a pistol and shoot yourself. And even if she was on board in the beginning, she should be able to withdraw her consent at any time, in my opinion. But I'm curious about, I want to circle back to something that Professor Swartz said at the beginning, which is about her emotional state and how we might factor that in terms of evaluating her wishes and whether or not we can trust what she's saying because of the kind of chemical baths that she's constantly being exposed to. I'm wondering, if you could say more about that, because I'm curious about whether the implication is, can we trust it what anybody says about how they feel ever, or if feelings are involved, does that make any statement untrustworthy or enough and inauthentic in that way?
I think it's by the way, I don't think people in the audience can see the Q&A. Is that correct? So maybe we could copy.
I just fixed that.
Oh, you fixed it. Great. Okay, thanks. I saw a Q&A about that. Thanks. So, Professor Nelson, thank you. I am concerned about this. And I love that Professor Hartsock brought up the issue of Cruzan. In Cruzan, we can't ask her what she wants because she's on permanently vegetative state. And the state law required this previous investigation to what she would have wanted. And this dissent brilliantly says that's a fool's errand, because trying to find out what she previously wanted is almost irrelevant. Most people have not thought, didn't know the specific situation they would be in the future, et cetera. And so autonomy is the wrong place to look. I'm probably incorrect in the law, but I'll tell you what the ethics here is from hearing this wonderful dissent, is that since she can't wake up and there's no reasonable prospect of Cruzan waking up, it's okay to end things, whether she ever foresaw that. It devalues, in my mind, the autonomy and increases the sense of what is good for a person. With Sylvia, it's similar because, again, we don't know what to think of her feelings because of all these chemicals floating around. Although, Professor Nelson, your point is well taken. She expresses her desire to die more convincingly on this dramatization of the play than I picked up when I read it. So I think actually it came through stronger to me. And so we can go to autonomy there. But again, autonomy is a tricky friend in bioethics. It is always a leader, as we know, but also what people say they want. We understand that best when we understand their reasons. And so I was plumbing those reasons here. We think, of course, she would want to die. It's so unnatural the way she's living. It's so, but it's gone beyond any reasonable end. And again, in all of that, there's this ickiness factor. Somebody else said the word ickiness. And of course, the brilliant term of wisdom of repugnance. Do we respect the repugnance we feel here? Or is there some, devaluing of actually a constrained life that could go on forever and be happy? Do we think that our life walking around is so great that now that she is constrained to a room, of course she's right to want to die? I think that would be a mistake to jump to that. I'd rather just know what she really wants. But again, that can be a red herring.
Jane, I'd like to address one of the comments in the chat about the gender language that's used. I think, actually, there's two things I want to address. I laugh out loud. Yes, we are heads on Zoom, just like Sylvia Lovejoy. And so, wow, we did not think that through, but it's pretty amazing. So the gender issues, if you reflect on the roles in the play, the major characters are men. At that time, historically, medicine was predominantly men. The minor characters, the characters who are literally controlled by the major characters, are women. And so I'm always reluctant to criticize or critique that, because people are they are embodied within the time and history within which they exist. So I don't want to judge Vonnegut on that, because that was to some extent the world that he lived in at the time. I wish I could say that I don't think that those gender differences still play out, but sadly I think they do. And I think for that individual, trying to see who was, Catherine, who asked that really important question, I think that is something for us to think about. How do gender and power figure into these sorts of circumstances? I know I've seen presentations at ASBH where female physicians have talked about how challenging it is to be a female in the medical profession. I know there's been discussion about gender challenges for women in academic medicine and just academics in general. So I think there's so much in this play that when you start thinking about it, it's sort of hard to know where to stop. But I agree with Catherine's comment about, I think that is something that we should pay attention to.
This is actually one of the questions that I had for the group, and I'm glad that Catherine brought this up as well. But my question actually for all of you was along these lines. This portrayal of Dr. Frankenstein as condescending, and I think that's an accurate portrayal. That's as he's written. That's not, just the actor kind of mapping that onto the character. But he's condescending towards Dr. Little, and he's very condescending towards Gloria. I think the condescension towards Dr. Little is interesting, as Dr. Little is sort of the small town family practice physician. And then you've got Gloria as both gender and then a non-physician role. I see this as kind of a critique of the medical hierarchy, whether intended or not. And do you see this hierarchy impairing good medical decisions in real life, as it seems to in Fortitude? Do you see this as a contemporary phenomenon as well? Go ahead.
Yeah, I give the shorter answer. Like Lucia, I'm going to do the short answer, which is like yes. So there we go.
Let me ask it differently, Peter and Lucia. How do you see this playing out in contemporary medicine?
So I think what I have observed, I have great physician colleagues who have shared with me some of the politics that they get to navigate. And I'm going to give a concrete example of how those power dynamics really matter. I had a wonderful colleague, and when he was the attending physician in the pediatric intensive care unit, his hat was pediatric intensivist. And he was always the go-to guy. Like, we waited for him to come on service because we knew he would have these hard conversations with families and patients. And that was wonderful. When he was the consulting nephrologist, because he was also a pediatric nephrologist, he did not have those conversations. And when he was consulted to come into the unit, he came and did what was asked of him. And he felt much less able to influence the conversation because he wasn't the captain of the ship. He was an invited guest. And so I see those dynamics play out in interesting and fascinating ways. And in terms of, there's a pecking order within physicians. There's a pecking order within nursing, right? You know, the senior nurse, the junior nurse, the charge nurse, and it has a big influence. So I think it plays out when people are reluctant to raise a voice that they would otherwise use because of a power differential. The authority gradient is what you hear. So.
On this issue of gender, I actually want to ask Elizabeth, this is a little bit of a detour, but you'd mentioned in your introductory remarks about some of the 1960s and 70s sci-fi idealized woman kind of, I don't know if we like archetype, trope, whatever we want to call it, that exists in literature and in some media. And I'm wondering if you can just say a little bit more about that. I mean, in what way do you see that really coming in Sylvia? Does she embody that, or does she play against it, or how do you see those features in the play?
Well, yeah. So when I was reading it, I was reminded of some work that I did when I was much younger it was more of a literature project as opposed to a historical one. And it was all about literature from the 19th century on usually male scientists creating like these kind of perfect robotic women or artworks that are perfect women. And you see this continuing through the 1960s and 70s with like the Stepford Wives and those kind of tropes. But yeah, it's kind of strangely, I mean, you can trace it back to like the myth of Pygmalion and the statue, right? It's a kind of robust trope in Western kind of culture, literature, mythology. And I think what can you say about it? That it's just deeply misogynistic because it's always this dream of like replacing these real women who are stupid and annoying and gross and below us and all this with a mate that is somehow worthy and fully manufactured to be physically perfect and somehow loftier because it's been created by a man. And there's also kind of a fantasy of being of motherhood, like the male creator. I mean, you see that in Frankenstein and going forth to a kind of taking over of the reproductive capacity of women, almost bypassing women altogether. So yeah, I mean, so when I read this, that was the first, like, that's where my mind went, because I had done a study of that kind of literature when I was but like half my lifetime ago, but it seemed to be very much kind of working in that tradition.
I don't know if it's on topic, but some things that Professor Nelson just said and Professor Wuschel before her is that this is our conference in bioethics and humanities, and I'm inspired to be here. I don't know if I can play the role the way it must be played, but the role of these fields in medicine is to try to allow the fight against disease and the fight to extend life, the fight to serve humankind, without allowing the effort to be perverted in terms of the sexuality and the gender issues that are being raised here, the savior complex, the allowing the psychological wounds that lead us sometimes to medicine to turn us into monsters. So I'm very inspired to think this is, of course, the right tension of a Dr. Frankenstein mindset, which I think I identify with little because I'm a primary care doc in a small town, and I kind of sound like him. I even appealed to him when I was talking about,
It's a mid-sized town. It's mid-sized, Peter.
The little town is my clinic itself. It's a little town, so it's that big. But it's the proper tension. It's that all these beautiful motivations, these beautiful sources for our work in life, in medicine, again, think of the provider side, not the only thing to think about, but can be gross, can become gross, can become pathological, and the work of ethics, the work of medical humanities, including, of course, all the many fields of medical humanities, is to try to balance that, because it's never going to be easy. There's never going to be an answer like the one I was asking for in my little comments. So I love the comments so far, and I feel very inspired by my panelists and by the audience questions.
So Jane, I think there's a great comment in the chat back to the question of, whether there's something worse than death, and the really difficult question that we have to face in terms of what's the value of a life that is diminished by some compromise in functional or intellectual capacity, and being very mindful that while some people may say very clearly they can see that some things are worse than death, who are we to decide for someone else? The research is pretty clear. Healthcare providers are pessimistic, and they consistently undervalue the life of persons with disability as those persons would value it. And so I think that that's what keeps many of us interested in bioethics. Is it seems like a simple question until you actually have to apply it to a particular patient situation. And I was quick to answer that question, and I'm still quick to answer it. And yet I know that it's not black and white. And so I really appreciate that comment in the chat about, it comes close to those issues of persons with disabilities. So thank you for that.
It absolutely does. And that was actually one of my questions I had thought of for Elizabeth in particular, that Fortitude might be subjectable to a disability studies analysis. That there's obviously a conversation to be had about Sylvia's autonomy. And that's kind of our go-to in bioethics is like, okay, well, let's talk about autonomy. But I'm curious if you have any thoughts about the way the play invites us to make judgments, whether appropriate or not, about Sylvia's quality of life.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, both my co-panelists have touched on, I think, some of the, in the comments as well, have touched on a very important perspective to bring in, which is a kind of disability studies perspective, and the ways in which when faced with these kinds of dilemmas, there can often be a kind of assumption about, what kinds of lives are worth living, or I wouldn't want to live that kind of life, that does not take into account those perspectives. So I just want to echo that, because I think that's absolutely crucial. I don't know, for me though, I still get stuck with, to me, Sylvia's case seems as clear as a case as you can get. And part of the reason why I say this is, and this is back to some of what Professor Schwartz was saying earlier in terms of autonomy and also mental state or mental capacity. Like I completely understand there are moments when if someone says that they want to end their life, you don't want to encourage them if they're in acute psychiatric crisis, for example. But in the case of Sylvia, it seems that she's been wanting this for quite some time. So I think like bringing in temporality and the extension of the story, how long this has been going on, how often she has reiterated the same wish, needs to be kind of part of how we evaluate her position, her true position.
No, absolutely. I was raised in the disability approach in my comments. Is there a part of us who says, oh, of course she's right to want to die. Look how limited she is. I don't like that. It can be a mistake, but I agree. Look at the degree to which her desire is repeated and therefore somewhat legitimate. I've just lost my thought. I may ask an IOU to come back in.
But I also think too about the kind of, if Sylvia had a different kind of social support network. I mean, one of the things that I think, going back to the Zoom comparison or whatever, like what does her world look like? It's all mediated through magazines. And I think that's a part of the story I haven't kind of like worked out in my mind yet, but like what her universe looks like. And is she able to have a community? Is she able to have a sense of support and independence and all those things that are essential for a full life. And perhaps if she had a different kind of social world around her, so it's not necessarily her body, but rather the environment, and if she were placed in a different environment or had a different kind of network around her, that she would have a different, she may wish to live, right? And so that might be another way to think about the kind of disability perspective on that.
I appreciate the comment in the chat about using iPads for patients who are dying, and the context of, if we've learned anything from COVID and the pandemic, the social isolation that people feel, the video interaction is a poor excuse for genuine human interaction. And Sylvia isn't stuck on Zoom, but for all intents and purposes, she's living a Zoom-like environment. And oddly enough, today, we're probably better able to relate to what that experience might have been like than we would have been when the play was written, because I think many people feel like the disembodied head on a screen, and they know the longing that they've had for just basic human contact. I can't tell you how many people talk to me about how wonderful it was when they felt like they could actually hug somebody after a year of being just on a camera. And so I appreciate that comment in the chat about, can we use iPads to facilitate something? And I would say that most people who had the opportunity to do that in deeply intimate personal moments during COVID care recognized what a sad excuse it was for genuine human contact.
There's also a comment in the chat on the issue of the magazines that's kind of interesting, food for thought, whether if you were to take the play and place it in today's world, those magazines might be an equivalent to social media that might connect her more to the external world, but would also give a very curated view of reality. And I think particularly the idea of reading Ladies' Home Journal, which is, such a I guess, quaint kind of women's periodical or something. So wonder if you guys have any comments on any of that.
Yeah, I'm curious what media Dr. Frankenstein would allow Sylvia to have access to. When you think about people,
definitely not Instagram. No, Instagram for Sylvia.
No Snapchat. No, right.
So I disagree. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. We talked over you.
Go ahead.
I think he would allow Instagram, because I think Instagram is feminized, or we think of it as like just girly stuff, and he seemed to I think he had like kind of two kind of spheres in his mind, and he's the man of science and he's concerned with all of that, and the girls can go upstairs and do hair and look at the magazines and scroll through Instagram. I don't think he would have cared about that. I think it would have been something that seemed beyond his purview, that let the girls do that.
So he wouldn't have thought it was important, that he didn't need to pay attention to it, is what you're saying.
Yeah. That's just stupid girl stuff, I think, is how he would regard that.
It is again, back to something Professor Nelson said before about the horror of the picture is not just the ridiculously advanced medical attempt to extend life, it's the control and of course the gender relation to that control that Frankenstein carries out over her. So take the same story and put her in a cart, with a mechanical body, walking around the world. It's better, right? It's not as clear that her desire to die, should be something she should want. If you could just give her back freedom, give her back independence, then it wouldn't be as disgusting what's happening. So I think this play is about control. Again, can you have medicine without control? Can you have medicine carried out by male doctors or by female doctors in a way that's not, recreating some of the ugly gender roles of male doctor, helpless female patient somehow. I was going to say too about the disability perspective. The idea that of course she wants to die and that death is natural is also, a standard part of our mindset, but also one that gets questioned by, say, the transhumanists, right? The movement that says the things you accept, Peter, as being a natural part of life, and of course a person understands that sometimes it's time to die, are just tradition and therefore can be dropped. And again, it gets back to that question, what do we do with our repugnance here? But I would say the repugnance drops so much if you just imagine the story with her in a robot. And I can't help myself. I'll say one more thing. The idea of taking her brain and having her live on after the death of her brain, which Vonnegut brilliantly raises, is of course now getting closer and closer with computers that could, perhaps download a human personality, not in our lifetimes, but maybe we're closer to that idea. And of course, I think the example of Sylvia does make us think, well, how could it ever really be you if it was outside of your body?
There are, I want to talk just a little bit more about the social media questions, because two more have popped up in the chat since we kind of broached that topic. And, there was the recent testimony of the executive or the person, the researcher from Facebook in front of Congress. And one of the things that she talked about was the research indicating that Instagram specifically has caused psychological harm, particularly to teenage girls, to young girls. And so that makes me wonder, again, this question of sort of like which emotions are ours and how susceptible are we to manipulation. I mean, this science fiction story is one where you've got somebody basically working levers down in the basement. I mean, the levers for today are an algorithm, right? And so, how far removed are we really from Sylvia and this experience of kind of being manipulated, whether we realize it or not?
Yeah, that's a deep thought that's going to take some reflection in terms of it's not one Dr. Frankenstein that may be influencing how we feel. And Jane, your comment of it's somebody's artificial intelligence, their algorithm that's been created, and maybe we are all just like Sylvia and we just don't know it. And isn't that a scary thought? Imagine what a book Vonnegut would write with that kind of material, right? We're all Sylvia, we just don't know it.
So turning back to some of the questions in the chat, they are, we've got a question here that came in early and I haven't had a chance to ask it yet, but it asks for some perspectives on paternalism of treatment of Mrs. Lovejoy and how what we might learn from Dr. Frankenstein to improve our communication with our own patients. We actually haven't talked much about communication with patients. I mean, I think those of us involved in clinical care kind of find the way he talks to the patient to be pretty abhorrent, but I have probably observed something close to that either as a patient or among our colleagues. And I'm wondering if there's any perspective on that from our panelists.
Where to start? So in terms of, I think that both overt and covert disrespect is what is so unsettling to me. And we know, I mean, the data is pretty clear. We know that we have to do better in how we communicate with patients, both in terms of empathic communication with them and in terms of clear cognitive information that they can process. So health literacy concerns for patients. And so, you know, the comments and the questions about communication, like that is an ongoing struggle for us and something that we will always have to be mindful of.
Peter, do you want to weigh in on this, or
Yeah, I'll weigh in. I was struggling with my unmute button. I didn't get a chance on the last one to say how I like that we're looking at the paternalistic, horrors of computer programmers rather than doctors, which I liked. But now that we're back to doctors and paternalism. So what's interesting is that Frankenstein is attempting to accomplish goals through non-rational means, like the sign on the door, enter smiling. And of course, good doctoring involves accomplishing goals, sometimes using tools that are outside of just rational means. Let's say I see another patient who won't have the vaccine, the COVID vaccine. My attempt to convince them to do this, I will use many tools, including some empathic listening. Partly because I want to understand where they're coming from, but partly because I know that empathic listening may help them feel heard and maybe move them towards making the right choice. And so I'm fascinated by this question of, paternalism, of course, is a bad word. I kind of like maternalism better when it's moving a patient towards something which we know is a good choice for their health. Can we do that without being paternalistic and actually instead taking on the role of a parent, a different gendered parent, and maybe more acceptably accomplishing the goals of medicine? So I do like the question. Again, this art of this play, like Professor Dr. Wuschel said, it's where to start with this. It's what are the lessons? How would medicine be best practiced, taking the lessons of Frankenstein to heart? And remember, Little is the one who apparently communicates well with his patients, right? They love him. He's won an award, and he is, somebody in the chat called him a butt kisser, which is I'm not sure it's 100% fair, but he is playing along in a way that's disturbing too.
All right, I think we have time to go through the final two questions in the chat, and then if we are ready to end even a little bit early, I think it's late for us here on the Eastern time zones. So the first question is a kind of broad question about the definition of terminal illness that allows for physician-assisted death in 2023 in Canada. I don't know that definition. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with it. What are your thoughts around the state of physician-assisted death in the US and where that may be headed? Because none of it would not have been legal in any state in 1968, right? And so Vonnegut is engaging a conversation that has not yet fully materialized.
So I'm going to use an Indiana example. Last year in the Indiana legislature, there was a bill introduced to consider physician aid in dying in the state of Indiana. It didn't go anywhere, but the fact that it was introduced and it wasn't a big headline and there weren't large protests, I think that speaks to the grassroots movement that will continue to propel that forward. And I believe it comes out of the average person's experience with a difficult death, whether it's because of a family member, because of their own death, what they see on TV, what's been exposed. So I'm from Oregon. I was in the state when the first physician aid in dying law was passed and passed again. And one of the things that I point out is before that law was introduced in the state of Oregon, there were 0 palliative care services in the state, in the entire state. So whatever you may think about physician aid in dying, the fact that that conversation was made public, that people were talking about it, changed and improved the care of patients who were dying simply by raising up what palliative care could make possible. And so part of me believes that we wouldn't have the robust palliative care teams that we have today had the average person not said, hey, you're terrible at taking care of us while we're dying. If you can't do it the right way, we need an exit strategy. So I don't know if that's a scholarly response, but for me, I'm not sure where it's going to go. But when I see something that controversial get introduced in Indiana and it doesn't make big headlines, it makes me think that we still need to do a better job of taking care of patients when they're dying.
I'll just say I don't know where things are going. I appreciate Dr. Wurshel's comments, but this play in '68, so before Quinlan, right before any of the public discussion of ways in which end of life could be desirable and necessary, and the fear of a medicine that doesn't understand that patients must be allowed to at least withdraw treatment and get a dignified death with the best help that medicine can give, I think motivates again the horror and the demand for an exit strategy, which Dr. Wurschel was perhaps subconsciously, maybe consciously, I suspect consciously, referencing the bestseller by Derek Humphrey, which told people how to get out. No, Final Exit. It was Final Exit. I'm sorry. There was an exit in there, and the bestseller in the '70s about how to kill yourself.
I do know when Colorado introduced its physician aid in dying statute, they did extend the definition of terminal illness, I think beyond anticipated death within 6 months. I can't remember what their exact definition of it was, but at the time, what was that, like 07 maybe or something? Maybe no, it must have been more recent than that. But there was a lot of speculation that this was sort of the beginning of the slippery slope to awful, awful things. And it really has not yet been. So just kind of interesting. The final question we have is one of the things that this person wondered about while watching the play is how the brain and intellect is considered such an important part of, quote, good quality of life in Western cultures compared with some other cultures where it is not as prized. And so just wondering if the panelists have any thoughts on the sort of cultural aspect of this play as emblematic of sort of Western cultural views about, I guess, the mind-body problem and the value of intellect and, you know, that sort of issue.
I guess that I didn't actually see it that way as her intellect being more prized. It was actually her you know, Gloria talked about her spark. She didn't talk about her intellect, and the spark was intangible, right? And Gloria struggled with how to say it and describe what it means. So I guess I don't think that there was a strong bias or lean toward the value of intellect. Not that I don't think that that isn't a challenge in our culture, but I actually didn't see that in the play. I saw the value of who she was as a person, her ability to interact meaningfully. And maybe that is intellect.
Well, it looks like that may be the last word then for this evening. And I want to thank all of our panelists for being here and for all of the participants for joining us this evening. It was really a privilege to be able to bring this presentation to you and to moderate this discussion among my colleagues and friends here at Indiana University. Again,
Jane, sorry, before we sign off, the person who asked the question about physician aid in dying in Canada provided clarification. They were talking about the including psychiatric or mental illness in the list of terminal illnesses.
Oh, okay. All right. Wow.
So we don't, I think, have time to tackle that.
That's a different panel.
Yeah, but I did want to call it out that they provided the clarification. So.
Okay, so anyway, I want to make sure that I offer an enormous thank you to the Vonnegut Museum and Library for offering us this space this evening. They have been wonderful hosts, and it's a really a privilege being able to present from this location. So I will not take personally the boiler up from Catherine Burke. I am going to overlook that as a Bloomington born and raised person. all and other presentations. Thank you very much.
Good night, everyone. Thanks for coming.